Assalamualaikum. On request of certain students, I am just demonstrating your meninges and cerebellum since they were not present in your dissection hall. Coming to the meninges, what are these meninges? As by now you all must be knowing that meninges are three layered. Outer one is the dura mater, middle one is the arachnoid mater, and innermost is the pia mater. Then this dura mater throws certain modifications. This dura mater, it has four modifications in the form of, this is your falx cerebri. This sickle shaped structure is your falx cerebri. This sickle shaped structure is your falx cerebri. As you can see in the picture, this is the lateral view of the skull. The skull bone has been removed and half of the left half of the cerebral hemisphere, that is the cerebral hemisphere, one cerebral hemisphere has been removed in this picture, and by removing the cerebral hemisphere, the view of the falx cerebri is quite clear. The view of the falx cerebri is quite clear. This falx cerebri, one of the important modifications of dura mater, has an apex. This is the apex. This is the apex. This apex is attached to the crista galli. Crista galli is here. It is attached to the crista galli. This apex is attached to the crista galli. Posteriorly, it has a base. Posteriorly, it has a base. Posteriorly, it has a base, and anteriorly, it has an apex. This base, and anteriorly, the apex. Anteriorly, the apex. This is the apex, and this is the base. Superiorly, it has the superior border, and inferiorly, it has the inferior border. Two surfaces, one is this surface which is facing us, and other is on the other side. Talking about the apex, this apex is attached to the crista galli. Base is attached to one more structure beneath it. This structure is called as the tentorium cerebelli. This structure is called as the tentorium cerebelli. Then coming on the superior border, this is the superior border of the falx cerebri. This superior border of the falx cerebri is attached to a sulcus in the skull, that is called as the sagittal sulcus. You have a sagittal sulcus, that is the sulcus which is present in the upper part of the skull, and this superior border of the falx cerebri is attached to that. Superior border of the falx cerebri is attached to that. Then this inferior border of the falx cerebri, it is free. Inferior border of the falx cerebri, it is free. This falx cerebri intervenes between two cerebral hemispheres. It intervenes between two cerebral hemispheres. Along the superior border, you have a sinus. This is the superior sagittal sinus. Along the superior border, you have a sinus called as the superior sagittal sinus. This is present throughout this border. Then along the inferior border, which I have taught you that it is free. Along this inferior border, it is present along the posterior 2/3. Inferior sagittal sinus is present along the posterior 2/3 of the inferior border. This is the inferior sagittal sinus, and this whole is your superior sagittal sinus. Then this falx cerebri, its base, as we are seeing here, this is the base. Here you can see the presence of a sinus called as the straight sinus. Here you can see another sinus, that is the straight sinus. This straight sinus rests on the superior surface of the tentorium cerebelli, which we will be seeing in the next pic. Once more, I will demonstrate for you the falx cerebri. Practical demonstration on laptop, as you can see, it's quite difficult, but since many of you have missed your meninges in your dissection hall, so just for the sake of your knowledge, I want to just clarify things. This is your falx cerebri, one of the modifications of dura mater. As you can see, this is sickle shaped. This is sickle shaped. For getting its view, we have just cut the skull and taken out one cerebral hemisphere, left cerebral hemisphere, and the view of the falx cerebri is quite clear. This is the apex, which is attached to the crista galli. This is the apex attached to the crista galli. Then you have a superior border which is attached one, and it is attached to the sulcus. यहाँ पे आपको एक sulcus होता है, that is called as the sagittal sulcus. This superior border is attached to the sagittal sulcus. Inferior border is free and it dips in between the two cerebral hemispheres. Then you have a base which rests on the tentorium cerebelli. Then talking about the sinuses, you have the superior sagittal sinus along the superior border. You have the inferior sagittal sinus along the posterior 2/3 of the inferior border. Then you have the straight sinus which is present in the base. Here again you can see this view. You can see the apex, you can see the base, you can see the superior border, you can see the inferior border, and here you can see this is the tent. You have this tent shaped material called as the tentorium cerebelli. You have this tent shaped material called as the tentorium cerebelli. The base of the falx cerebri is attached to the superior surface of the tentorium cerebelli. Again you can see this is the falx cerebri, and this material, this tent shaped thing what you are coming across is your tentorium cerebelli. Here is your tentorium cerebelli. This is a tentorial notch or tentorial hiatus, about which we will be talking in the next slide. Now look at the first picture. Look at the first picture. Here you can see this is the base of the skull. Both the cerebral hemispheres have been removed. Cerebrum as a whole in the spic have been removed. So what will you see? When you will remove the cerebrum, you will be seeing the tentorium cerebelli beneath. You will be seeing the tentorium cerebelli beneath. In this pic, the cerebrum, both the cerebral hemispheres have been removed. And what you come across? The tentorium cerebelli. Here from this side, even tentorium cerebelli has been removed. Now in this picture, as you can see, this tent, it acts as a partition between the supratentorial contents of the skull and the infratentorial contents of the skull. Your supratentorial mainly comprises of your cerebrum. So your cerebrum has been removed. On the right side, you can see your tentorium cerebelli has also been removed. What you can see beneath that? This is your cerebellum. This is your cerebellum. So your tentorium cerebelli is a partition between the cerebellum and the cerebellum. See this tentorium cerebelli in the picture. It is quite evident. This tentorium cerebelli, it has a free margin. It has a free margin and it has an attached margin. It has a free margin and it has an attached margin. Anteriorly, it gets attached to a thing here. यहाँ पे आपका एक processes जैसा होता है, उसको हम बोलते हैं anterior clinoid process. Those processes are called as the anterior clinoid processes. It attached anteriorly to the anterior clinoid process from this side as well as from this side, lodging a notch here. Here a notch is formed. This notch is called as the tentorial notch. Then posteriorly, you can see in the picture, it is attached to the, you have a sulcus here. You have a sulcus here that is called as the transverse sulcus. It is attached to the transverse sulcus. It is attached to the transverse sulcus on the occipital bone, and it is some part is attached to the parietal bone. Some part is attached to the parietal bone. Then this, as we were talking, this is this this point here. This point here, which this blue dot here, it is called as the confluence of the sinuses. Here all the sinuses meet. Here all the sinuses meet. In the first diagram we had reached up to the straight sinus. This is the straight sinus. Then further, the straight sinus, after that comes your transverse sinus. comes your transverse sinus, one this way and other this way. These are your transverse sinus. Transverse sinus. The transverse sinus drain into this. This is called as the sigmoid sinus. This is called as the sigmoid sinus, which finally drains into the internal jugular vein. Which finally drains into the internal jugular vein. Is it clear? Then this was we had talked about the your falx cerebri and then your tentorium cerebelli. You have one more modification of dura mater, that is the falx cerebelli. This is your falx cerebelli. This structure, small structure, is again tent shaped. Sorry, it is again sickle shaped. Can you see? It is again sickle shaped like this falx cerebri. This falx cerebelli. It has an apex. It has an base. Okay? It has attached border and it has free border. Apex, base, attached border and a free border. Apex blends with the foramen magnum. Here you have a big foramen, that is called as the foramen magnum. Apex blends with the foramen magnum, and base, as you can see here, it attached to the inferior surface of the tentorium cerebelli. Base is attached here to the inferior surface of the tentorium cerebelli. Then you have the one border is fixed border, that is attached posteriorly to the occipital sulcus, and you have this free border which intervenes between two cerebellar hemispheres, Along this border you have the presence of the occipital sinus. Then briefly giving the demonstration of the cerebellum. What is this cerebellum? It is the infratentorial structure which is present beneath your cerebrum, and it is even present beneath your tent. So what you can come across, see this. This is the superior surface. This is the superior surface of the cerebellum. This is the anterior cerebellar notch which is present anteriorly. This is the anterior cerebellar notch which is present anteriorly, and this is the posterior cerebellar notch which is present posteriorly. As you can see in the picture, again your cerebellum is being divided into lobes. See this. This is the posterior view of the cerebellum. As you can see in this picture, your cerebellum has first of all two hemispheres. This is one and this is the other. This is one hemisphere and this is the other. Basically, some students had confusion about these fissures. So here the picture is quite clear. This is primary fissure. This is primary fissure which is present superiorly. Then you have this horizontal fissure, which is present through and through. This horizontal fissure is present through and through. You have this primary fissure again. See this primary fissure which is present on the superior surface, and you have this horizontal fissure which is present through and through. Fine. Then the lobe in front of the primary fissure, this hole is your anterior lobe. And this is your posterior lobe. Fine. This is your posterior lobe. See the superior surface. On the superior surface, two hemispheres, left and right, they are being separated by means of this vermis. This vermis, it's called vermis because it is worm-like. Fine. This vermis has parts. It has central lobule, culmen, declive, folium, tuber, pyramid, uvula, and nodule. Fine. It has parts. It has central lobule, culmen, declive, folium, tuber, then tonsil, pyramid, uvula, and nodule. Fine. Rest are present here. You can see nodule, uvula, tuber, and pyramid. Fine. superior surface. If we see the superior surface, superiorly on the cerebellum you have vermis. Vermis has parts as central lobule, culmen, jacli, folium. Then if we see the inferior surface, the vermis has parts as tuber, pyramid, uvula and nodule. Fine. Then you have the concerned areas on the cerebellum which are associated with this vermis. As it is evident here, this pink colored area is your anterior lobe, this green colored area in the first pic and in the other pic is your posterior lobe, and this is your flocculonodular lobe. It contains the flocculus. It is your flocculonodular lobe, this pink colored, and it is being separated from this from the posterior lobe by means of this posterolateral fissure. Here it is, posterolateral fissure. Again, I will summarize things for you. This is the cerebellum superior surface. Both the hemispheres are being separated by means of vermis. Then this is the anterior cerebellar notch, this is the posterior cerebellar notch, this is the fissura prima. Then you have the horizontal fissure which is present through and through. This is the anterior lobe, this is the posterior lobe. Here again inferiorly you have the part of the posterior lobe, and this is the flocculonodular lobe which is separated from this posterior lobe by means of the posterolateral fissure. Then vermis is being divided into parts superiorly into central lobule, culmen, jacli, folium, and inferiorly tuber, pyramid, uvula and nodule. Then inferiorly you have this partition. This is called as the vallecula. Then if we take the section of the cerebellum, you have the arbovitae appearance, that is the tree-shaped appearance of the cerebellum. Here again you can demarcate. This is the anterior lobe. See in this pic, this is the posterior lobe which is present even superiorly as well as inferiorly, and this is the flocculonodular lobe separated by fissura prima and posterolateral fissure. Your cerebellum is present just posterior to your pons and the medulla, lodging a space here called as the fourth ventricle. Thank you.